Hey guys, I'm Sam with Scrappy Industries. Welcome back to the 1944 Cleveland engine revival. We can at least pick half. Now, if you remember the last video, we were very close to starting, but not quite there. We've narrowed the issue down to fuel is coming to the inlet of our fuel filter setup here, but it's not coming out of the outlet. And it's not the fuel filters themselves. These are like a cleanable type. I'll show you in a minute. I had these bowls off, put them back on. We'll take it off. More or less, today we're going to start with ripping this all apart and seeing if we can rebuild this fuel filter assembly. One thing I noticed is really cool is it's basically all brass. This whole thing is cast brass. This whole support for the shaft on the valve is all brass. And I kind of destroyed some stuff here, and at this point we're committed to getting it apart and probably machining a new internal valve body. I think this is more or less a plug valve. Shouldn't be that hard to make once we get it apart. If we can get it apart, see what we have, we'll get it apart. But the way this works is it's meant to be serviced while it's still running, because this is evidently an emergency backup generator. It's got to run full time. So right now we're kind of pointed at these two filter strainers, whatever you want to call them. So these two could be serviced while the engine is running. Then you flip the valve over and you can run on these two while you service those two. So that's pretty neat. So right now I've boogered up the end of the shaft on our plug valve here enough that we can't take the I assume this is some sort of mechanical packing that this was tightening up in there. So we can't take that off right now. It's all messed up. I'm thinking we might just have to cut this off square, the shaft, and then I'm thinking potentially drill and tap it, and that way we can put a puller in there and pull the guts of that valve out. As long as we can get it out of there, we'll measure it up and make a new one. So let's get started. And when I had the packing nut loose and I was really cranking on this thing with a pipe wrench, unfortunately, I think we tweaked everything, but now that's out of the way, maybe I can dig all this out and maybe we'll just put a little bit of heat to this thing and just still use a pipe wrench or something and just see can we work the valve out of there. However new can. Super mega vice grips, I'm wondering if they'll help us. Wowzers. Our cut it off puller idea is what we're gonna have to do here. Yeah, I think we went a little low. I love using sockets for anything pulling or pressing. So we'll just put that on there with a proper length 3/8 bolt. Alrighty. Let's see what this does for us. I wish I had drilled that straighter. Well, we'll see if we can get it to draw out. Come on, girl. Either it's stripped or it's going. Look at that. Sweet. Oh, it's tapered. Huh. That's an interesting design. And I wish I wouldn't have destroyed it.
Not that we can't make it, but it's not as straightforward to make as I kind of thought it would be. We'll get them all cleaned up. And I still don't think it'd be that hard just to start over here, honestly. So it looks like all this thing does is this is the outlet side and this is the inlet side. So this inlet passage comes down here. It's the one in the back. So it'd either be like this, allowing it to come down and go that way, and then from the filtered side coming here and going up to this little gallery. And if you turn it this way, basically the inlet fuel comes in and down in the top and goes that way, and then comes back and then goes back up. So it's either this way for these filters, that way for those filters.
All right, so now we got this all apart. Next, let's get this pulled apart and cleaned up. Some of these bolts, the heads are like rusted completely off. So you can't currently take this fuel filter off. This one, maybe. We've had the two outside ones off. Let's pull this thing all down. I think I'm gonna unhook the inlet, the outlet, and this pressure sensing line. Just pull it off the engine and then we can clean it all back up. As far as our plug valve goes, this guy will work. We just have to run it with a pipe wrench. So I ordered some new material to make a new one, but for tonight and playing around with this thing, we can get this together. Tomorrow, good old McMaster car will have us our new brass bar for this, as well as some new packing, and we'll be able to rebuild this thing and put it back together how it was, how it's supposed to be. All right, we got one of them out. You can see there is absolutely no bolt head left. Basically, it's sitting down here in this hole and all the water could have just laid in there. So we have one more to do. I just put a little spot of weld on it so we have fresh surface to weld to. I'm gonna weld another socket head cap screw on like we just did and hopefully back that out. I loosened all the other bolts because then that bolt's like, you know, you take all the tension off, now it'll wiggle around. So we should be able to put the other bolt on, back her out, no big deal. And these ones, obviously we took that one off already. This guy here, he's not hard to take off. And we'll just pull these off. I don't know if I need to take this off the engine or not. We'll just clean everything out, blow through all the ports, and be ready to clean and reassemble. We are gonna need to make some new gaskets for these strainer housings.
Hey, we got a full turn. Oh, there's actually filters in this one. So maybe the inside too are the secondary filtration. We better be careful in case we can't get these.
So I'm doing some looking here trying to find this fuel filter because of the full flow number on this tag, and I just can't believe this isn't like a common thing. Can't find anything, but from the dimensions, at least close to the dimensions on this filter, I've come up with this Wix 33512 number, and principal application is Detroit diesel. What are the odds? So just pulling this bolt out of here, I have to admire. This is absolutely beautiful weld. Oh my, I think Ray Charles could have probably done better. But hey, the bolt's out. That's what counts. Alrighty guys, so I want to machine this new plug for the diverter three-way valve on this fuel filter housing. And of course the easiest thing to do would be to use this dual spindle CNC lathe behind me. But we're not going to do that. Another option we have to make this part is the old Lodge and Shipley here at the farm shop. It's got a taper attachment and is perfectly capable of making this part, but we're not going to use it either. The 1943 Monarch 10EE. And the reason we have to use this lathe for this job is simple. It was part of the Navy as well. I bought this lathe when I went to Penn State. It was actually in their laboratory. From what I understand, it was part of a Navy program with Penn State where they were developing torpedoes back in the World War II era. So this thing has a Navy history as well to it. And I was super excited when I bought this lathe. It was my senior year at college, and I picked this guy up for $500, and it's been with me ever since. But unfortunately, it does not have a taper attachment, but I checked and the compound has just enough 3-inch stroke to be able to make this taper for us. And on that note, if anybody has a taper attachment for a round dowel 10EE that they want to sell, hit me up. I'd like to buy one for this guy. Monarch gave me the original paperwork for it, and International Harvester bought this lathe brand new, so I don't understand how it ended up at Penn State from IH, but it did. They also had a receipt from Penn State ordering a taper attachment for this machine, but it was never with it that I saw it, so I don't know where the taper attachment went, but it'd be nice to have one sometimes. So from what I can measure, this is a 3-degree taper on this valve, and because this is bent, we can't grip it like this and check that taper. So what I plan on doing is just holding around that edge and then using the tailstock in the center here. So now I'll put the mag base indicator here on the tool post, run the compound in and out, and that way we can check the 3-degree angle that I put on the compound here and make sure that we're accurate to this old part. We'll probably have to bump that in, get it dialed up, and then we're ready to make our new part. Now we're hitting it harder on this side, so we'll back this off a little bit. Yeah, we're gonna call that good. All right, so the reason I did that is because all you have otherwise is the angle scale here, and I'm trying to set that to 93 degrees, so it's hard to very accurately set that. So I'm just using the old part because it seemed to fit very well into the housing. So we're using it and basically just trying to match that taper just as well as we can. Now when we get to this point with the new part, we'll put the exact same taper back on it. I'm just going to leave the compound set at that angle. So the first thing I'm going to do on making the new part is put these grooves in. Now unfortunately, we don't have any manual mill to use. Both here at work and at home, we don't have a manual mill. This older Haas CNC, that's our only mill, that's our workhorse. I mean, we don't run it super hard, but, you know, she does the job. We're going to get it fired up, and that's how we're going to put the slots in this thing. Alright, so we're going to drop this guy in there, and we're going to put these slots in outside the vise like so. Snug up on that. Sure we're mashing down everything. Stacking up those parallel sideways isn't really the best thing in the world, but it'll work. This is how we're probing our work offsets so the machine knows where the part is. XYZ0 is essentially right here in the center on the end. So first we did Y by probing each side, now we did X by touching this side, and now we're going to move up and over. Z is perfectly centered because we did Y. So we're centered on the bar to touch off our Z. And then, yeah, we are right at 1.375. We're just going to take half of that off. So in G54Z, we're going to take a minus 0.688 off. And that's going to lower it by half of that 1 3/8 diameter. So now our origin is basically right on this edge, but I'm going to move it to the right 15 or 20 thousandths. That way we're going to clean up this saw cut, and I'm basically going to strike a line here, and then on the lathe, when we go into the lathe after this operation, we'll clean that up to the line we struck, and that'll locate these two slots, and we're also going to pre-drill that hole that's at the end of the shaft, all in one operation here. So we'll come over to X, and we'll just add, let's add 15 thousandths. So what that's going to do is move that origin to the right 15 thousandths, and now we're ready to run our program. Master Joe! Alright, so I have our mill stuff programmed up now. I'll give you a quick overview of what we're looking at here. We're going to strike off our index mark there. That's our index mark that we're going to turn to, and that's our index mark that we're going to saw this to when we're done. We're going to come in, put these two grooves in it. Then we spot drilled and drilled the 3/8 hole that's out here in the stem that we destroyed earlier. So basically when it comes out of the mill, everything except for turning it down to this 3/4 inch diameter and turning this taper on will be done. We'll be ready to saw cut it here and go to the lathe. This is our spot drill. And then finally we'll come in with a 3/8 drill. This guy's not going all the way through and into the parallels. There you have it. Step one of machining is wrapped up. Let's head on over to the little Monarch. We can eyeball this guy up and just kind of check things out, and everything looks good and lined up as far as that goes. So the reason I put these two little index marks here is this edge here tells us where we need to saw cut it. That way we go right to the bandsaw. We don't even have to measure anything like that. This one tells us where we're going to turn to with the lathe. We're going to come right up to that lip. And then same thing with this lip. That's where we're going to turn to with the lathe. And basically I'm just drawing with the mill at that point. And there she is. Let's go do some turning. So now we're going to come back over to the lathe, and we've already set the compound based on this taper that we have to turn. And because that's a taper, we can't turn that first because then we have no way to hold it to turn this side down to 3/4 of an inch. So what we're going to do is hold on this while it's still a cylinder, turn this down to 3/4 inch, and we're just turning up to this shoulder from the whole way back. And then we'll flip it, hold it by the little 3/4 shaft. We'll be fine our 6 jaw. We just won't go crazy on cranking it to more the shaft. We'll face this, center drill it, and we'll support it with a live center, and then we'll turn that taper on there. And that's really all there should be to it, unless anything goes terribly wrong. So when we first start out, we're going to hold this side, we'll face it, center drill it, and that way we can hold that with a live center and support it while we're drilling that little 3/4 inch shaft side. Remember, this is our mark. I'm going to flip on the digital readout, and then we can zero off of that mark. So I've just bumped up against that little shoulder, and that'll allow us to come up here and zero the Z. Need to figure out how far we need to run our tailstock out to have enough clearance. This locks our tailstock. Tighten up on a little bit. Snug up the quill. And it's going to be awful tight there. About out of tailstock though. That'll work. Alrighty, we're gonna turn this down to 3/4 inch on this shaft. Basically what I normally do, and thank goodness for digital readout, it makes your life so much easier, is I just turn it down until we're, getting closer. And basically when I'm making even cuts, I'll take a pass, measure it with the calipers, type that into the digital readout so it's like, oh, it's 0.80, type in 0.805, whatever it is. And then just keep taking equal steps. That way your deflection and everything is relatively consistent and you'll end up close. That's my tactic anyway. There's way more people way better than me at this. So there we have it, step one. Now we can hold it by this side. We already have our center ready to go. Our compound's already set on the correct angle. So we're gonna work this in, and all I'm gonna do is basically just start winding in with the compound, and every time we step the carriage in, it'll move this point where we lose contact to the left. And we'll run that all the way down to here, and then at that point, we'll be able to measure the diameter here, and we know our target from the old guy here. And we'll just keep going until we get it all shaved in there where we need it to be. Looking better already. Just a skosh. Tighten this guy a skosh. All right, that puts us within a 1/2 thousandths. I think we're gonna be a-okay with that. All right, let's see how well we can turn this taper. It kind of stinks that we got to turn the compound by hand. If we had a taper attachment, we'd just be power feeding and let the taper attachment move the whole cross slide. But we don't have that on this lathe. We have to use this lathe because it's Navy brethren. So let's make it happen. Look at that piece. We just got to deburr this stuff in here. And she's ready to roll. Lucky enough we didn't even have to do this on a battleship while we were getting shot at by the enemy. Can't have this cool new valve without a quality new handle. So that's why I got this little bit of 3/4 inch hex stock. I'm just gonna chuck that in the lathe, turn a 3/8 male on there, and that'll fit in this hole and allow the operator to run this valve. We'll just put a big chamfer or something on the backside, make it just kind of nice to hold. I don't know if there's any reason to make it any shorter. It's probably a little excessive, but it'll be all right. Is she 373? Oh, buddy. 73.5. The old Monarch. He does all right. I mean, you basically couldn't make this really cool valve without a really cool handle. Look at that. I like it. Alrighty. Hopefully that's the last time she sees daylight. So let's just test fit that with that. That's gonna set over to here or here. And it's obviously gonna end up with some distance with the packing behind it. So the old Napa 3512 here seemed to measure close to what we needed. Let's see if it works. All right, so it fits over that. It's a good start. I feel like it's probably a little bit bigger diameter than we really want. But fuel can still make it through that hole. So you can see the definite difference in outside diameter here. We'll see. I just kind of want to see, where does this bottom out at? There's a fair gap there. I don't know if it's going to crush enough to seal the housing. Kind of feel like it's not. Fortunately, this filter really doesn't look that bad. I think we might have to do this once this is mounted, because you need this all to be vertical and get this lifted up in there. Let's see if we can do a little better job with this thing vertical. I got the housing all bolted back onto the block, and our inlet and outlet flanges are all bolted back on as well as our sense line. Now the way this works, this isn't hooked up. We need to get the right fitting here eventually, but basically you get your inlet pressure up here on the pressure gauges, and then on the same gauge but a different needle, you get the outlet pressure. So that way you can see the differential pressure going across your filters. I think that's really cool. They do the same thing over on the oil filter as well. So you can kind of judge the filters by how your two needles start to spread out. So some really neat things on that instrument cluster up there. We can check that out in a little more detail. Our newly refurbished fuel filter is ready for a little priming action. We need to put fuel back in our tank, hook the air hose up, and push some fuel through. So I'd like to give a huge thank you to our watcher, Dan. Thanks, Dan, for sending us over the operation and maintenance manual for this thing. This is extremely helpful, and the one big thing I noticed is the error I was making on using our bleed valves. I thought this valve needed to be open, where it says outlet to filter. I thought it was like open to be an outlet. So this valve is actually a bypass for the fuel pump that's right here behind it. I think it's a gear pump. And basically, if you have this open, the pump just pumps in a circle inside this block and it can't make any fuel pressure. So this valve has to be shut for the fuel pump to make pressure. This pump over here is essentially your rail bleed, and when it's open, we get fuel out of this return line into the bucket. When it's closed, we don't get any of that. I thought that the relief valve would allow it to return to tank like a lot of newer fuel systems are. You're constantly circulating. That's not how this works. The pressure regulator inside this block is essentially on the outlet of the pump, and it just recircs from the outlet of the pump to the inlet of the pump. So under normal circumstances, we will not have any fuel coming out of our return line on this engine. So to get it primed, we're gonna open this valve, and that'll bypass the pump when this one's open, and it'll push it through the rail, and we'll get fuel out down here. And then there's also a step of bleeding up by the fuel injectors, so we need to crack the nut loose and get fuel bled all the way into the injectors themselves. And then once everything is ready to start, we tighten those down, tighten all this down, and then it should be able to make full fuel pressure with this bypass valve closed for the pump. So with that being said, I think that was probably a lot of the problem we had when we were almost running, is we didn't actually have rail pressure because this valve was open. So thanks, Dan. So you can see this time we had no trouble priming the fuel to that outlet rail. So that's awesome news for us. We still leave our bypass valve open, and we open the one here at the outlet of the rail. There we go. Prime the whole rail. I'm gonna shut the rail off, this outlet here. That'll stop this flow. So this thing's only purpose is to bleed. So now we shut off the pump bypass. That allows the pump to make full pressure. I say let's try it. Well, after we totally rebuilt the fuel filter housing, we've primed everything, it's go time. I think it's gonna run. Let's see what happens. I'm gonna crack the return line. Here it is. I think we got air yet. Oh, we better get the doors open. This is our lube oil pressure at the strainer and our lube oil pressure at the engine. They were both up eventually.
It's like it was running on 1 and then 2 and 3 all picked up at one time. So excited, that's awesome. Well, she fires right back up now. Woo! I'm so happy. I'm so excited. This thing is awesome. Well, I don't want to run her too much because we have no coolant in it, and we're probably going to hurt a sleeve if we continue to keep running it, but man, that's so awesome. So we have a little bit of cleaning up, tidying up, leak fixing to do here, but all in all, I love it. Now what to do with it? I think cleaning and painting it is kind of inevitable. Now, how immediate, I don't know, but it deserves it. This thing is really cool. So one thing I want to touch on real quick on this is an emergency shutdown, but it works separate of the injector. What it does is there's actually a little lever underneath here, and I only noticed this when I had all the rockers off. But basically when that trips, that lever falls underneath, and when that rocker's pushed down by the camshaft, it goes underneath the rocker, and it just keeps that injector rocker depressed. So as the camshaft keeps spinning, it can't come down and follow the camshaft, so it quits injecting any fuel regardless of where the rack is. So if the rack gets stuck and you hit that overspeed trip and this goes under, it cuts out all 3 injectors. They're not pumping up and down anymore. So basically it is a very good automatic shutdown. And that lever there between this gear case and number 3 cylinder, that's a reset for that overspeed trip. So this thing runs at 1200 RPM. I think the book says at like 14 or 1500, that's when that overspeed trip is supposed to engage and just cuts it out on an emergency stop basis. So now that we have it running, the next step is going to be, can we make any power? And we're not going to make it too far through this, but I want to at least see, is the exciter making any DC voltage? The way this works, this is a small permanent magnet DC generator, and we have F1 and F2. I believe that means field 1 and field 2. That would, these 2 wires, run over here to these 2 wires and create the magnetic field in the main AC generator here. And then your 3-phase output comes from these 3 wires. So step 1 in making this work is we need to have the 125 volts DC coming out of the exciter here. If that doesn't make the power, we'll just need to take and arc it, kind of like you do with an old generator on a tractor or a car or whatever. You just take a jump pack and just touch it and kind of get it started to polarize it, if you will. And that should start making power. I don't think we're gonna get into any of that tonight, but I freed the brushes up. They were stuck. There's 4 brushes. I think all 4 of them were kind of stuck. So everything now is moving as far as the brushes go. We get it running. I don't want to run it too long again, but we'll check our voltage here. And we can see, it'll probably make, like a couple volts out of here with no field voltage from the exciter, but we should see the frequency, which will basically what we'll have to use to set the governor because we don't have a tack. It would be cool. I bet this thing had a really neat old mechanical tack in the center of that cluster, but we're missing that. It would connect up here. I bet somebody thought it was cool and took it, or it may have never had it, I don't know, but we could potentially find an old tack for it and rig something up as far as that goes. Let's get her fired back up and do a little checking. I think we're going to want to check F1 and F2 here. We may need to check out here on that armature. I'm a little nervous getting that far from the throttle still, if you couldn't tell. But we were making 6 volts between A1 and F2. We didn't seem to be making anything between F1 and F2, but we're definitely going to have to polarize this. Might have to tear it apart and machine that down nice and true. All in all, we need to get this thing well grounded and be careful when we start messing with all this electricity stuff behind me. Well guys, I think that pretty much concludes this part of the mission. As far as time going forward here, I would love to paint this thing. So I hope we can come up with like, you know, a neat load for this thing. If you guys have any ideas, let me know down in the comments. I'm thinking, you know, like maybe a big ice cream machine, something like that. We're gonna have to come up with some sort of way to cool this thing. I know we have some old Caterpillar radiators around, but it's not a cat. So we at least need to come up with a Detroit radiator, maybe a fan, something like that. But this thing would have gone to a heat exchanger, probably had glycol or at least fresh water running through the engine and then seawater through that heat exchanger. So we'll just put it on an air-cooled radiator system, maybe build some sort of a frame out there to hold the radiator. We'll figure that stuff out, but get her cleaned up, painted up, and looking cool, because there's not many of these things around, and I think it's just a really neat engine. It has a really cool sound to it. It sounds like a Detroit, but for men. And I don't know that that's gonna come across that well to you guys on the other side of the computer and TVs, but believe me, when you're standing here with it, it is really cool. So that's what we'll be able to show off at shows with it, you know, in the next few years. So I think it's gonna be really cool. Again, I'm Sam with Scrappy Industries. Thank you guys for watching.
See this kid is a Nimrod, and it's been painful being his mother.
You gotta hold it a little bit, probably. Push.